The loner rancher searched desperately for milk for his newborn until the Black Widow knocked at his door with a full breast. "Your baby's dying," she said, stepping through the storm into his candlelit cabin as his son's cries pierced the mountain air. The townsfolk whispered she was cursed, this educated woman who'd lost her own child, destined to wander as an outcast bringing misfortune wherever shadows fell. Meanwhile, the grieving rancher clutched his weakening infant, his isolated world crumbling with each passing hour. But this mysterious woman carried more than milk. She held legal documents that could reshape both their fates, while a hidden conspiracy threatened to strip away everything they might build together. Will desperate need overcome deadly prejudice, or will fear destroy the one alliance that could save them both? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The baby's cries echoed through the mountain cabin like a funeral bell. Jeremiah March paced the wooden floor, his 3-day-old son growing weaker in his trembling arms. The child's face had turned pale as winter frost. His tiny fists barely had strength to clench. Sarah was gone. His wife had died bringing this boy into the world, and now Jeremiah watched helplessly as death reached for his son too. The nearest doctor lived 20 miles through bandit territory. The storm outside made travel impossible. Jeremiah stumbled to the kitchen cabinet. Empty milk bottles stared back at him. His hands shook as he searched through Sarah's belongings for anything that might help. Behind her jewelry box, yellowed papers caught his attention. Legal documents bearing an unfamiliar name, Isabel Baptiste. The writing was Sarah's careful script. Arrangements had been made, instructions given, a wet nurse secured, but none of it made sense to Jeremiah's exhausted mind. Thunder crashed overhead. The baby's cries grew weaker. Down in Millbrook, the townspeople gathered in Murphy's saloon despite the storm. They spoke in hushed tones about the woman who'd arrived 2 weeks ago. The Black Widow, they called her. Isabel Baptiste carried herself too proudly for a woman of her kind, too educated, too independent. She'd lost her own child, they whispered. Cursed, some said. Others claimed she brought misfortune wherever her shadow fell. The banker's wife crossed herself whenever Isabel passed. The preacher warned his congregation about women who refused their proper place. But Isabel Baptiste paid their whispers no mind. She had business to conduct and property to manage. Her late husband had left her more than most men in the territory could claim. Land, cattle, money in 3 different banks. The town's hatred couldn't touch her fortune, though it followed her like smoke. Back at the cabin, Jeremiah collapsed into his rocking chair. The baby's breathing grew shallow. His son would not survive another hour without milk. Jeremiah closed his eyes and prayed to a God who seemed to have abandoned him completely. A knock echoed through the storm. Jeremiah's eyes snapped open. Nobody traveled in weather like this. Nobody came to his isolated ranch without good reason. He clutched the baby closer and approached the door with caution. Lightning illuminated a woman's silhouette through the glass, tall, dignified. Water dripped from her dark cloak. Jeremiah opened the door. Wind and rain lashed into the cabin as Isabel Baptiste stepped inside. Her eyes immediately found the crying infant. She removed her wet cloak and hung it carefully on a peg. Her dress was fine quality wool. Her boots were polished leather. This was not a woman seeking charity or shelter. Isabel approached slowly. Her movements were calm and purposeful. She studied the baby's pale complexion and listened to his weak cries with the attention of someone who understood. Jeremiah found his voice. The woman's presence filled his cabin with an energy he couldn't name. She carried herself like royalty, but her eyes held the same grief that haunted his own. Isabel extended her arms. Jeremiah hesitated. Every instinct told him to protect his child from strangers. But his son was dying, and this woman showed no fear or uncertainty. He placed the baby in her capable hands. Isabel examined the infant with expert precision. She checked his breathing, felt his temperature, observed his coloring. Her touch was gentle but confident. This was not her first dying child. She unbuttoned her dress without shame or hesitation. Jeremiah turned away, but she paid his discomfort no attention. Her own loss was recent. Her body still carried what his son desperately needed. The baby latched immediately. His cries stopped. Color began returning to his cheeks. Isabel settled into the rocking chair as if she belonged there. Jeremiah watched in amazement. His son drank with strength he hadn't shown since birth. The change was immediate and miraculous. Death retreated from the cabin like shadows fleeing dawn. Isabel reached into her travel bag with her free hand. She produced the same legal documents Jeremiah had found among Sarah's things. Her signature matched the papers perfectly. The arrangement had been real. Sarah had planned for this possibility. She'd known the dangers of childbirth in the wilderness. She'd prepared for the worst and chosen her replacement carefully. Jeremiah studied Isabel's face as she fed his son. This was the woman the town called cursed. The black widow they claimed brought misfortune, yet she'd appeared in his darkest hour like an answer to desperate prayer. The baby finished feeding and fell into peaceful sleep. Isabel held him with natural ease. Her presence transformed the cabin from a house of mourning into something resembling a home again. She looked up at Jeremiah with eyes that held intelligence and determination. This woman was no ordinary frontier widow. She carried herself like someone accustomed to making important decisions, someone who owned more than she revealed. The storm raged outside, but inside the cabin, hope flickered back to life. Jeremiah's son would survive. The question now was what price this salvation would demand, and whether he was prepared to pay it. The morning sun revealed truths that darkness had hidden. Isabel Baptiste sat at Jeremiah's kitchen table with papers spread before her like a general planning battle. The baby slept peacefully in a makeshift cradle, his breathing strong and steady. Jeremiah poured coffee with shaking hands. The night's events felt like a fever dream. This elegant woman had saved his son's life. But her presence raised more questions than answers. Isabel lifted a deed from the stack of documents. The paper bore official seals and legal stamps. She placed it where Jeremiah could read every word clearly. His eyes widened. The deed showed ownership of 500 acres adjoining his property, prime grazing land worth more than most men earned in a lifetime. The owner's name was written in bold letters, Isabel Baptiste. She produced another document, a bank statement from Denver showing deposits that made Jeremiah's head spin. Numbers he'd never seen outside of railroad company ledgers. A third paper revealed cattle holdings across 3 counties, herds numbering in the thousands, assets that would make her one of the wealthiest ranchers in the territory. Jeremiah set down his coffee cup with trembling fingers. The black widow the townspeople whispered about owned more land and livestock than anyone in Millbrook, more than the banker, more than the railroad men, more than all of them combined. Isabel watched his reaction with calm patience. She'd grown accustomed to shock and disbelief. Her success threatened every assumption people made about women like her. She reached for another document. Sarah's handwriting covered the page in neat, careful lines. A letter dated 6 months before her death. Instructions for finding Isabel. Arrangements for the baby's care. Plans made in secret. Sarah had known the risks of frontier childbirth. She'd researched and investigated until she found the perfect solution. A woman with resources, experience, and reason to help. Someone who'd recently lost her own child and understood a mother's desperate love. The letter revealed more. Sarah had visited Isabel's ranch twice during her pregnancy. They'd discussed terms, signed agreements, planned for every possibility. The 2 women had formed an unlikely friendship based on mutual respect and shared fears. Jeremiah read his wife's words with growing amazement. Sarah had described Isabel as the most intelligent woman she'd ever met. College-educated in Boston, fluent in 3 languages, capable of managing complex business operations that would challenge any man. Isabel's late husband had been a progressive thinker. He'd taught her everything about ranching, banking, and land management before his unexpected death from pneumonia. She'd inherited his empire and expanded it through careful planning and strategic investments. The townspeople's hatred stemmed from jealousy and fear. They couldn't accept a woman controlling so much wealth and power, especially not a woman who refused to apologize for her success or hide her capabilities behind false modesty. Jeremiah studied Isabel's face as understanding dawned. This wasn't charity or coincidence. This was business. Sarah had chosen her replacement with the same care she'd shown in everything else. Isabel retrieved one final document, a partnership agreement outlining the merger of their two properties, combined resources, shared labor, unified operations that would create the largest ranch in 3 counties. The numbers were staggering. Their joint holdings would control water rights, grazing land, and cattle herds worth a fortune. Together, they could weather any storm, survive any hardship, prosper beyond anything either could achieve alone. But success would come at a price. The community that barely tolerated Jeremiah's independence would never accept their partnership. The same people who whispered about the Black Widow would unite against any alliance between them. Isabel had faced such opposition before. Her husband's relatives had challenged her inheritance in court. Town officials had questioned her business licenses. Neighbors had spread rumors about her character and intentions. She'd survived every attack through careful preparation and legal expertise. Her lawyers were the best money could hire. Her records were meticulous. Her contracts were ironclad. Still, the constant battles had taken their toll. Isolation was the price of independence. Loneliness was the cost of success. Until now, she'd accepted both as necessary sacrifices. The baby stirred in his cradle. Isabel rose gracefully and lifted him with natural ease. She'd always wanted children, but pregnancy had eluded her for years. When she finally conceived, the child had lived only 3 days. Caring for Jeremiah's son filled a void she'd tried to ignore. The infant needed her in ways that money and property never could. His dependence was honest and pure, free from the calculations and prejudices that poisoned adult relationships. Jeremiah watched her tend to his child with expert care. This woman could give his son advantages he'd never dreamed possible. Education, opportunity, connections in Denver and beyond. But accepting her help meant abandoning the simple life he'd always known. Partnership with Isabel would thrust him into a world of complex business dealings, legal challenges, and social conflicts he wasn't prepared to face. The baby finished feeding and gurgled contentedly. Isabel returned him to the cradle with a smile that transformed her entire face. For a moment, the formidable businesswoman disappeared, replaced by someone softer and more vulnerable. She gathered the documents with practiced efficiency. The offer was clear. The terms were generous. The benefits were undeniable. Jeremiah faced the most important decision of his life: accept partnership with the most capable woman in the territory, or continue struggling alone with a child who deserved better than poverty and isolation. The choice would determine not just his future, but his son's destiny. 3 weeks into their partnership, the transformation was undeniable. Isabel's skilled ranch hands had repaired fences that had stood broken for months. Her prize cattle grazed alongside Jeremiah's modest herd, doubling their combined assets overnight. She'd moved into the guest quarters with efficiency that impressed him. No drama, no demands for special treatment, just quiet competence that made everything run smoother. The baby thrived under her constant attention. Thomas had gained weight and developed the healthy complexion of a well-fed infant. His cries were stronger now, more demanding. He'd grown attached to Isabel's gentle touch and soothing voice. Jeremiah found himself watching her work with growing admiration. She handled business correspondence before dawn, managed ranch operations through the morning, and cared for Thomas without missing a beat. Her energy seemed limitless. Her ledger books revealed the scope of her empire: cattle sales to military forts, grain contracts with mining towns, investments in Denver real estate that generated steady income. She'd built a financial network that spanned the entire territory. The loneliness that had consumed Jeremiah since Sarah's death began lifting. Having another adult to share meals and conversation reminded him what companionship felt like. Isabel possessed wit and intelligence that challenged his thinking on everything from cattle breeding to territorial politics. She never mentioned her own grief directly, but he caught glimpses of pain in unguarded moments. the way she held Thomas a little too tightly, the careful distance she maintained from his wife's belongings, the photographs of her late husband and lost child that she kept private. Their evening talks revealed the depth of her education. She'd studied literature and mathematics in Boston before marriage brought her west. Her husband had encouraged her learning, unusual for men of his generation. Together, they'd planned an empire built on knowledge rather than just luck and hard work. But clouds were gathering beyond their peaceful domestic arrangement. Marcus Brennan arrived on a Tuesday morning with the false smile Jeremiah had learned to distrust. His brother-in-law carried himself with the swagger of a man who believed his opinions mattered more than facts. Marcus studied Isabel's cattle with calculating eyes. He questioned the wisdom of such rapid expansion. Too much too fast, he suggested. Sarah wouldn't have approved of such reckless partnerships. The comments stung because they played on Jeremiah's deepest fears. Was he dishonoring his wife's memory by accepting another woman's help so quickly? Did his relief at having capable assistance make him weak or practical? Marcus planted seeds of doubt with surgical precision. He wondered aloud about Isabel's true motivations. Rich widows didn't usually concern themselves with struggling neighbors unless they expected substantial returns on their investments. Jeremiah defended the partnership, but Marcus's words echoed in his mind after the man left. He found himself studying Isabel for signs of manipulation or hidden agendas that simply weren't there. Meanwhile, trouble was brewing in Millbrook. The town council had called emergency meetings about the scandal developing at the March Ranch. Proper Christian folk didn't approve of unmarried men and women living under the same roof, regardless of circumstances. The banker's wife organized prayer circles dedicated to saving Jeremiah's immortal soul. The preacher delivered sermons about temptation and moral weakness that everyone understood were aimed at the situation. But their moral outrage masked deeper concerns. Isabel's success threatened the natural order they depended upon. If one woman could accumulate such wealth and power, what prevented others from following her example? The men who controlled Millbrook's economy watched her expansion with growing alarm. Her cattle contracts undercut their prices. Her efficient operations made their methods look outdated. Her very existence challenged assumptions they'd never questioned. Strange incidents began plaguing neighboring ranches, fences cut during the night, water holes poisoned with dead animals. Cattle rustling that targeted specific herds with suspicious precision. The victims blamed Isabel's presence for their misfortunes. Her success had brought a curse upon the region, they claimed. The Black Widow was spreading her poison through the community. Jeremiah investigated the incidents with growing unease. The pattern seemed random, but something nagged at his consciousness. The timing was too convenient. The targets too specific. Someone was orchestrating chaos for purposes that remained unclear. Isabel faced the hostility with characteristic grace. She increased security around their combined properties. Her experienced ranch hands knew how to handle troublemakers and protect valuable livestock. But the constant tension wore on her in ways she tried to hide. Jeremiah caught her staring out windows with worried expressions. She double-checked locks and counts with obsessive attention to detail. Thomas remained blissfully unaware of the adult tensions swirling around him. He'd grown into a robust infant who smiled at Isabel's voice and reached for her with tiny fingers. His attachment to her was obvious and complete. The bond between them created its own complications. Jeremiah realized that losing Isabel now would devastate his son almost as much as losing his birth mother had. Thomas had imprinted on her as his primary caregiver. Legal challenges to Isabel's property rights escalated daily. Her late husband's distant relatives filed claims questioning her inheritance. Town officials suggested her residency at Jeremiah's ranch constituted abandonment of her own holdings. The attacks were coordinated and professional. Someone with resources and connections was funding a systematic campaign to destroy her legal standing. The goal seemed to be forcing her to choose between protecting her empire and caring for Thomas. Isabel prepared for battle with the thorough planning that had made her successful. She hired additional lawyers and gathered evidence of her legitimate claims. But fighting on multiple fronts stretched even her considerable resources. The partnership that had seemed so promising now faced its greatest test. The pattern emerged on a cold October morning when Jeremiah found the third poisoned water hole. Dead cattle floated in water that had run clean the day before. The losses were mounting, but something about the destruction felt calculated rather than random. He studied the scene with new eyes. The poisoning had targeted specific herds belonging to the most financially vulnerable ranchers, properties that would be worthless without adequate water sources, land that could be purchased cheap by anyone with ready cash and patience. Isabel arrived at his side with Thomas bundled against the morning chill. She examined the evidence with the methodical attention she applied to all business matters. Her expression grew darker as understanding dawned. Marcus had visited each affected ranch in the weeks before their troubles began, always offering sympathy and practical advice, always suggesting that struggling neighbors might benefit from selling their holdings before things got worse. The timing was too convenient to be coincidence. Isabel's business records revealed another troubling pattern. Marcus had approached her lawyers with inquiries about purchasing distressed properties throughout the region. He'd positioned himself as a concerned citizen, helping neighbors in crisis, but his offers were consistently below fair market value. He was betting on desperation, forcing quick sales at bargain prices. Jeremiah returned home that evening to find Isabel reading through Sarah's personal belongings. She'd discovered a wooden box hidden beneath loose floorboards in the bedroom. Inside were letters that cast new light on everything they thought they knew. Sarah had suspected Marcus of improper advances long before her marriage. He'd courted her aggressively and taken her rejection poorly. His interest in the ranch had always seemed more personal than brotherly. The correspondence revealed Sarah's growing unease about Marcus's frequent visits and inappropriate comments. She'd confided her fears to Isabel during their secret meetings, seeking advice from someone who understood dealing with persistent, unwanted attention. Sarah's final letters showed genuine terror. She believed Marcus was planning something that would harm Jeremiah and the baby. Her arrangement with Isabel wasn't just about childcare. It was about protection from a threat she couldn't name directly. The pieces fell together like a puzzle solving itself. Marcus had expected Sarah's death to leave Jeremiah vulnerable and isolated. A grieving widower with a dying infant would be easy to manipulate or eliminate. Isabel's arrival had disrupted those plans completely. Her resources and intelligence made Jeremiah stronger rather than weaker. Her presence transformed him from potential victim into formidable opponent. The systematic destruction of neighboring ranches served multiple purposes. It created chaos and fear throughout the community. It generated distressed properties for Marcus to acquire cheaply. Most importantly, it provided cover for more personal revenge. Isabel spread Marcus's correspondence across the kitchen table. His letters revealed a mind consumed with resentment and entitlement. He believed Jeremiah had stolen the life that should have been his by marrying Sarah first. The legal challenges to Isabel's holdings took on new meaning. Marcus had connections with lawyers and officials who could be influenced or bribed. He was using the system to destroy her financially while conducting his shadow war against her personally, but Marcus had underestimated his opponents. Isabel's education and business experience had prepared her for exactly this type of systematic attack. She'd survived similar campaigns from her late husband's relatives and emerged stronger each time. Jeremiah's knowledge of local terrain and relationships provided crucial intelligence. He knew which neighbors could be trusted and which were susceptible to Marcus's manipulation. Together, they possessed advantages Marcus hadn't anticipated. They began gathering evidence with methodical precision. Isabel's business connections provided access to banking records showing Marcus's property acquisitions. Jeremiah's friendships with honest ranchers yielded eyewitness accounts of suspicious activities. The poisoned water holes contained traces of chemicals available only through specific suppliers. Isabel's lawyers obtained purchase records linking those materials to companies Marcus controlled. Fence-cutting incidents followed routes that bypassed areas where Marcus grazed his own cattle. The pattern suggested intimate knowledge of property boundaries and grazing schedules that only longtime residents would possess. Thomas provided an unexpected advantage in their investigation. His presence made their visits to neighboring ranches seem social rather than investigative. People spoke more freely around a baby, revealing information they might otherwise keep private. The infant had grown robust under Isabel's care. His laughter filled rooms that had been silent since Sarah's death. His innocent joy reminded everyone that life continued despite the darkness surrounding them. But Thomas also represented the stakes involved in their conflict with Marcus. If they failed to stop his schemes, the child would inherit nothing but debt and danger. Isabel's determination hardened as she realized the full scope of Marcus's plans. He intended to destroy everything she and Jeremiah had built together. Her fortune, his ranch, their partnership, and Thomas's future were all targets in his campaign of revenge. She'd faced powerful enemies before, but never ones motivated by such personal hatred. Marcus's actions weren't just business. They were attempts to erase her very existence from the territory she'd claimed as home. The legal system that was supposed to protect property rights had been corrupted by Marcus's influence. Traditional appeals to authority would fail because he'd compromised the authorities themselves. Justice would require evidence so overwhelming that even corrupt officials couldn't ignore it. They needed to catch Marcus in actions so clearly criminal that his network of supporters would abandon him rather than face prosecution themselves. The investigation had revealed their enemy's identity and methods. Now came the dangerous work of exposing him publicly before he could complete his plans for their destruction. The trap was set for a Sunday morning when the entire town gathered for church services. Jeremiah and Isabel had spent weeks preparing evidence that would expose Marcus's crimes publicly. The timing had to be perfect. They arrived at the church with Thomas bundled warmly in Isabel's arms. The congregation whispered as they took seats near the front. Some voices carried disapproval. Others showed curiosity about the notorious partnership. Marcus sat with the town council members, his confidence radiating through the crowded building. He'd grown bold after months of successful schemes. His latest property acquisitions had made him one of Millbrook's most influential citizens. Pastor Williams finished his sermon about truth and justice. The irony wasn't lost on Jeremiah as he stood to address the congregation. This was the moment they'd planned for weeks. Jeremiah's voice carried clearly through the church. He spoke about the poison that had infected their community, not the curse that some blamed on Isabel's presence, but the deliberate corruption of one man's greed. He produced the first piece of evidence: chemical purchase records showing Marcus had bought the exact substances found in poisoned water holes. The supplier's signature was clear and undeniable. Murmurs rippled through the congregation. Marcus maintained his calm expression, but sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool morning air. Isabel rose gracefully with Thomas still in her arms. Her educated voice commanded immediate attention as she presented bank records showing Marcus's systematic acquisition of distressed properties, always purchased below market value, always from desperate sellers facing mysterious catastrophes. The pattern was unmistakable once laid out clearly. Every ranch that had suffered livestock losses or property damage had subsequently received purchase offers from Marcus's holding company. Pastor Williams examined the documents with growing alarm. Other congregation members crowded forward to see the evidence for themselves. The whispered conversations grew louder and more agitated. Marcus finally spoke up, attempting to dismiss the accusations as desperate lies from immoral people protecting their sinful arrangement. But his voice lacked its usual authority. Jeremiah produced Sarah's hidden letters. His wife's own handwriting described Marcus's inappropriate advances and threatening behavior. Her fears about his intentions toward the ranch and their future child were documented in painful detail. The congregation gasped as they realized Sarah March had died, believing Marcus posed a direct threat to her family. Their beloved neighbor's final months had been poisoned by terror of the man they'd trusted as a pillar of the community. Marcus's composure finally cracked. He stood abruptly and accused Jeremiah of forging the letters to protect his inappropriate relationship with the Black Widow. His desperation made him reckless. But Isabel had anticipated this response. She produced additional correspondence between herself and Sarah that corroborated every detail. The handwriting analysis was conclusive. The timeline was accurate. The evidence was overwhelming. Thomas began crying in the tense atmosphere, but his distress served their cause perfectly. The baby's innocent presence reminded everyone what was truly at stake. A child's future hung in the balance of adult corruption and greed. The town council members who'd supported Marcus began distancing themselves visibly. They moved away from him physically and avoided meeting his increasingly frantic gaze. Sheriff Morrison finally stepped forward to examine the evidence personally. He'd been reluctant to investigate Marcus due to their friendship, but public pressure now demanded action. The chemical purchase records were authentic. The bank documents were official. The property acquisition pattern showed clear criminal intent. Marcus made one final desperate play. He accused Isabel of orchestrating the entire scheme to frame him for her own crimes. She was the outsider, the suspicious woman who'd brought nothing but trouble to their peaceful community. But his words rang hollow against the mountain of documented evidence. The congregation had seen the proof with their own eyes. They'd heard Sarah's own words describing her fears and suspicions. Isabel's response was measured and dignified. She reminded everyone that she'd arrived only after the crimes had begun. Her presence had actually helped expose Marcus's schemes by providing resources for proper investigation. The chemical suppliers confirmed their records under oath. The property deals were documented in official government filings. The timeline established Marcus's guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. Sheriff Morrison placed Marcus under arrest for fraud, property destruction, and conspiracy. The charges would expand as the investigation continued, but enough evidence existed for immediate detention. Marcus's network of supporters crumbled instantly. Nobody wanted association with someone whose crimes were so thoroughly documented and publicly exposed. The congregation erupted in discussions as the implications became clear. Their community had been systematically poisoned by one man's greed and personal vendettas. Innocent people had suffered while they'd blamed the wrong person entirely. Several ranchers approached Isabel with apologies for their suspicions and hostility. They recognized now that she'd been helping expose the real threat to their community rather than causing it. The banker's wife publicly apologized for organizing prayer circles against Isabel's presence. The preacher acknowledged that his sermons had been misdirected based on false assumptions about moral character. Thomas stopped crying as the tension in the room shifted from hostility to resolution. His innocent presence had witnessed justice being served through truth rather than violence. Marcus was led away in chains while his former supporters watched in stunned silence. The man they'd trusted had betrayed their community for personal profit and revenge. The evidence would lead to additional arrests as investigators uncovered the full scope of the conspiracy. But the immediate threat had been neutralized through careful planning and overwhelming proof. Justice had prevailed through dignity and intelligence, rather than force or vengeance. 1 year later, the morning sun illuminated the largest ranch operation in 3 counties. Combined herds grazed across rolling hills that stretched to the horizon. New fences marked boundaries that encompassed thousands of acres of prime grazing land. Jeremiah stood on his expanded front porch, watching Isabel direct the construction of additional barns. Her pregnancy had slowed her physical activities but sharpened her focus on long-term planning. The baby was due in 2 months. Thomas toddled across the yard with the confidence of a child who owned the world. His laughter filled spaces that had once echoed with loneliness and grief. At 15 months old, he showed no memory of the desperate early days when survival had been uncertain. The wedding had taken place 6 months after Marcus's trial, a simple ceremony in the same church where they'd exposed his crimes. The pastor who'd once preached against their arrangement blessed their union with genuine enthusiasm. Isabel had insisted on maintaining her business independence even within marriage. Her lawyers had drafted agreements protecting her assets while combining operations for maximum efficiency. She remained Isabel Baptiste professionally, while taking Jeremiah's name socially. The arrangement shocked traditional thinkers, but proved financially brilliant. Their merged operations generated profits that exceeded even Isabel's optimistic projections. Efficiency increased while costs decreased through shared resources and coordinated planning. Marcus's trial had revealed the full scope of his criminal network. 3 county officials faced corruption charges. 2 lawyers lost their licenses for fraudulent filings. A dozen accomplices received sentences ranging from fines to imprisonment. The poisoned ranches recovered quickly once the sabotage ended. Property values rebounded as confidence returned. Several neighbors approached Jeremiah and Isabel about partnership opportunities in various ventures. Sheriff Morrison had redeemed himself through thorough investigation of Marcus's crimes. His detailed work uncovered financial fraud dating back 5 years. Recovery of stolen assets helped compensate victims for their losses. The town council formally apologized to Isabel for their role in spreading false accusations. They asked her to serve as economic development advisor, recognizing her expertise in business growth and territorial expansion. She accepted the position with conditions. Any policies she recommended must apply equally regardless of race or gender. Economic opportunity should be available to all residents willing to work hard and conduct business honestly. The progressive stance attracted other forward-thinking families to Millbrook. Population growth brought new businesses and expanded markets. The town that had once shunned change became a model for territorial development. Isabel's success story spread throughout Colorado and neighboring territories. Newspapers in Denver wrote articles about the wealthy businesswoman who'd overcome prejudice through competence and determination. Her achievements inspired other women to pursue economic independence. Educational opportunities expanded under her influence. The local school added advanced mathematics and literature courses. Children of all backgrounds gained access to learning that prepared them for opportunities beyond traditional frontier occupations. Thomas would grow up in this environment of possibility and progress. His mixed heritage of practical ranching knowledge and sophisticated business education positioned him for success in whatever field captured his interest. The new baby would enter a world very different from the one that had nearly claimed Thomas's life. Medical care had improved with the town's prosperity. A trained physician now resided permanently in Millbrook. Jeremiah had evolved from isolated widower to community leader. His partnership with Isabel demonstrated that cooperation across traditional boundaries created strength rather than weakness. Other ranchers sought his advice on business matters and family challenges. Their marriage had survived the scrutiny that accompanied public prominence. Both partners maintained their individual strengths while building something larger together. Respect and shared goals proved more durable than passion alone. The ranch employed 30 workers, representing diverse backgrounds and skill levels. Fair wages and respectful treatment created loyalty that translated into productivity. Employee retention was nearly perfect. Isabel's cattle breeding program had produced stock that commanded premium prices at territorial markets. Her systematic approach to genetics and nutrition set new standards for quality and consistency. Water rights secured through legal challenges provided irrigation for expanded agricultural operations. Vegetable gardens and grain fields diversified their income sources while supporting local food security. The house itself had grown to accommodate their expanding family and business operations. A large office managed correspondence with buyers, suppliers, and government officials. Guest quarters housed visitors conducting territorial business. Thomas showed early signs of intellectual curiosity that delighted both parents. He recognized letters and numbers despite his young age. His questions about ranch operations revealed genuine interest in understanding how things worked. The baby stirred in Isabel's womb as she reviewed quarterly financial reports. Profits continued exceeding projections. Investment opportunities multiplied faster than they could evaluate them properly. Jeremiah joined her at the kitchen table where they conducted their evening business discussions. Partnership had taught him to value her insights on matters ranging from personnel decisions to political developments. Their success had attracted attention from territorial officials, considering Colorado's eventual statehood. Economic leaders like them would help shape policies affecting future generations of residents. The transformation from desperate survival to prosperous leadership had taken less than 2 years. Hard work, intelligent planning, and mutual support had overcome obstacles that seemed insurmountable initially. As evening approached, they watched Thomas play in the yard while discussing plans for the coming year. Expansion opportunities beckoned in multiple directions. Their empire continued growing through careful choices and calculated risks. The loner rancher had found more than milk for his newborn son. He'd discovered partnership, prosperity, and purpose that exceeded his wildest dreams, when desperation had driven him to accept help from the remarkable woman the town had called the Black Widow.